Hey there, SHIRO listeners, SaturnDave here, reminding you that you must play Sega Saturn, and that it's contributions from listeners like you that help keep this and our other shows hosted and available on demand, in addition to our website, SegaSaturnShiro.com, where you can find all of the most up-to-date news and information from around the Sega Saturn scene. If you'd like to show your support and gain access to several perks, visit patreon.com/Shiro Media Group to become a Patreon supporter. If a monthly donation isn't possible, no worries. We still value your support in liking and sharing our content on social media and joining our Discord community to become a part of the Saturn conversation. Thank you for being a loyal listener and a part of this great community. And as always, hey everybody, it's SaturnDave and welcome to Editor's Corner. Today or tonight or whatever time you happen to be listening to this, we have guests with us. We have Dan, the Mega Driver. We have James, the Segaholic, and from the East Coast, we're joined by Mel, Sega Lord X. How are you guys doing?
Doing great, man.
Very good, very good.
Thanks for staying up late and waking up really early to do this. I appreciate all of you guys. So this is kind of a follow-up on the last cast James and I did with Mel. It was kind of like a catch-all, on being older gamers, people saying the Saturn's a failure, gatekeeping, all that cool stuff that we touched on. I actually thought it was a really good conversation. We kind of got into the meat of a lot of those topics. And one thing Mel said that really stuck with me was just this narrative that's just been churned and regurgitated over the last 20, 25 years is that the Saturn was a failure. Like it or not, that's basically the history. Book closed, The Saturn was a failure, deal with it kind of thing, Of course, James had this brilliant idea. Let's play with that a little bit. What are the ways that the Saturn was not a failure? In fact, let's talk about how the Saturn isn't a failure at all.
Yeah, that kind of twist on, as you said, what Mel had kind of touched on, in the previous cast, about narratives that are out there. And as Mel said, where's our narrative?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, as I says to you as well, Dave, if you go online and you search for Sega Saturn, the majority of the searches that come back are why the Saturn failed. Mm-hmm. How could the Saturn not have failed? What could have saved Sega? The blame for Sega's failure always seems to land firmly at the feet of the Sega Saturn, which isn't fair at all, isn't historically correct either. So, there's, as you say, commercial success isn't the only caveat to what makes a console great. So I think if we can perhaps dig into those contexts and come at it from another angle, look at the things where what the Saturn did well, what innovations it had in terms of hardware, the industry, and just kind of take it from there and see where the wonderful tangents of our conversations take us.
Definitely. And we didn't have Dan last time, which is great that he's with us now. He's a very busy dude.
Yeah, for some reason, I was so busy that last time, but I love listening to that episode. It was a load of fun. Funny enough, I was just, while James was talking just now, I thought just for a laugh, I'll go on YouTube and I will type in just Sega Saturn. I won't type in anything else, just the two words Sega Saturn. Literally the first video that came up was a great big splash page. What went wrong?
What went wrong? Why Saturn failed? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just absolutely done to death.
I mean, James, you mentioned commercial success or failure, but I mean, like, if you're a Japanese gamer, it was a commercial success, right? And I mean, if you were Sega Lord X, it was a success, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like, if you were from Brazil or if you were from Portugal, Saturn was a success, But it's like the narrative that's the loudest is this Western narrative because of the press. We all know PlayStation took the lead, but man, they spun it out. They really spun the whole, PlayStation and Nintendo 64 are so much better. And, that equals, Saturn's a failure.
Yeah, so I think expanding on that a little bit, it's not just the magazines. And I think you've got a really good video on the SHIRO YouTube site, which is a compilation of the Bad Influence UK video game show that used to air on like our terrestrial television. And you can kind of see in that, even from before the console was launched, there was this, and I don't want to kind of dwell too much on the PlayStation side, and there was a bias and stuff. And I know, Mel, you've covered that to a degree in some of your videos, the Street Fighter Alpha review. But I think even on television, there was this this view that the Sega Saturn was kind of losing before it even came out into the West, which is crazy because if you think of when those consoles were first released, when they were airing on British TV at the time, they just launched in Japan. And what was the Sega Saturn launch in Japan, if anything but an enormous success? You know, it sold 500,000 units before Christmas. So it's crazy to me. So it does feel like straight from day one, before it even had a chance to be any sort of a failure or a success, the Western views kind of painted it as a failure of sorts in its own right, and was coming with this distorted view of what it was doing. And that kind of just carried on through its life. And I don't think we're gonna, we'll touch on the fact that we can't really sugarcoat this, because from obviously a UK, US, Western standpoint,
right,
the commercial performance was disappointing. But there's so many other, like you say, so many different walks of life, so there are many different metrics to measure success. I mean, for us, we're all here because the Sega Saturn is our favorite games console of all time. And that in itself is success. And as we dig deeper into that, we'll understand that whole reason that it's rooted so firmly in our hearts is because of other successes that it had.
Yeah. I think that what I'm hoping we get out of this, and what we perhaps, do moving forward, is to try to flip the narrative a bit, at least moving forward. Because it's like now we're squarely into the retro, Saturn is many times over retro. So it's like all that history is done, and so now it's just whatever we make of it now. So I feel like it's very much a success now as it's picking up steam and a lot of people are coming around on it. But I do want to explore a little bit of that success that it had that people don't really give it credit for. Maybe we could kick it off with Mel. Obviously your story is one of success. You followed the console, you loved it, you got the games. You pretty much squeezed every ounce of enjoyment out of it that you could, though you still came up against struggles towards the end, with the games kind of trickling off there, bad press, not necessarily always getting a fair shake on things. How do you feel about the narrative that the Saturn failed? Do you think that it's even fair to begin with, or do you think that it's definitely not something that can be argued objectively?
Oh, that's a big question. When you really think about the Saturn, you really got to go back to before the console launched. And you need to look at the media of the time, the gaming magazines that were talking about it coming to the West. The system launched originally in Japan in late 94. And then of course, Western magazines started picking up the games that started coming out for it. And that's really where the narrative of the Saturn, to the majority of us here in the US and in Europe and so on and so forth, really started to learn about the Saturn. And of course, right from the jump, you heard these resoundingly negative things about the Saturn. People were asking, was it weak? Did Sega make a mistake designing it the way they did? I remember there was a magazine called Next Generation. And Next Generation was a sister magazine of a UK magazine called Edge.
Yeah.
And I remember they went into such detail about the next generation systems before they ever come out. And their narrative was almost always, wow, look how good these PlayStation games look, versus, man, why do these Saturn games all look like this? Why is Virtua Fighter flat shaded? Why isn't it texture mapped like Toshinden? We're really worried about the Daytona USA port. It's not really looking great so far. You started getting these little narratives like questioning the power of the Sega Saturn before the system ever launched. And I remember feeling that at the beginning, like, are they onto something? Or, what's going on here? Why is the narrative like this? Because if you remember, I imported my Saturn when it came out, and I'm sitting here loving this thing, like, wow, I'm blown away. It's got a Model 1 port already. The Model 1 port was like a year after it came out in the arcade. That was a big deal. Why wasn't that being played up more?
Right.
And, you go back and just that kind of Sony bias, it undeniably existed because nobody had seen a Western version of the console yet. Nobody had seen more than a handful of games. How the hell was Sony getting all of this positive press and Sega was just being crapped on?
Money under the table.
It makes you wonder.
Thing is, it's like I always almost question my own sanity. Like, it's been so long and we've had years and years of everybody repeating the same information that I almost feel like I've forgotten what actually happened. And James brought to my attention how many wonderful reviews there were for Daytona USA. He was just like, okay, I had to see if I was crazy. And I went and I looked and there's all these great reviews for Daytona USA. So what gives? Like, did they kind of retroactively go back and say that it was shit, and because they saw PlayStation, did they like change their tune, or was it just Daytona USA sucks from day one? Because according to a lot of the reviews that James dug up, it was like people really were excited about it.
I mean, that's the thing as well, Dave. Like you mentioned, Mel, you said about the Next Generation magazine, where the sister magazine of Edge.
Yeah.
And well, doing that video, I was looking at the Edge review. I didn't want to take into account the Sega affiliated reviews, so I went for like the two I picked were Digitizer from the UK and Edge. And Edge gave the Japanese version of Daytona an 8 out of 10, and all the things that they said in it are all the things that we've banged the drum about for so long. The car AI, the way it aggressively tries to cut you off, the way that they jostle with one another, the handling of the arcade is there. They even mentioned that, the Saturn version has what they call aggressive pop-in, that even the Model 2 version of Daytona has pop-in, albeit much further in the horizon. And that's because of the limited VRAM on the first version of the Model 2 boards. So, you're even taking into account there that the Saturn version is scaling down the way from much more advanced hardware, like £4,000 arcade machine to a £400 console. But all the things that we still say today from our experience of playing Daytona
were true then.
They pointed it out. But yeah, that's interesting that as a sister magazine of what we were getting was, at that point, at the early part of the Saturn's kind of introduction, was positive to us in the UK, that in kind of American press, there already seemed to be this kind of, negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Dan touched on the bad influence stuff, as well. They said straight out the bat, the console runs games on cartridge as well as CD. And straight away, you're putting old technology first. You're in the minds of the person watching, they hear cartridge first. So the takeaway from that is, right, it runs games on cartridge and CD, whereas the PlayStation runs its games on these cool black discs, and it's like, come on, really? So
you also question their journalistic integrity a bit. When they say that, you're like, wait a second, do they really know what they're talking about? Yeah. So here's the thing, people will try to say that the hardware itself is bad. I was telling James the other day, I was like, the Saturn doesn't know it's a failure, right? It's just a dumb machine. You put discs in it and it plays games, right? And it plays good games. So it's like, it doesn't care. It's like, give me a game, I'll play it, and the Saturn has a ton of great games, and the hardware itself, I think we all love it. Like, it draws 3D differently, sure, but it's got its own flavor, it's got its own personality, so that's not a bad thing. Really, I think it comes down to the 90s and that everything was basically judged by comparison, so it was like, here's an FMV game. Well, it's bad by comparison because we're not into FMV anymore, right? So maybe everybody was just too busy judging the Saturn by comparison.
When you talk about the differences between Sony and Sega, I think a lot of the narrative that you get today is because of the narrative of Sony being so successful, because if push the PlayStation out of the conversation for just a second. Take a look at Saturn games when it came out in 94, 95. Would you honestly say any of those games look bad compared to what else was on the market? Of course you wouldn't. They looked spectacular in most cases.
Mhm.
You know, especially the stuff that was designed for the hardware. You only begin to, you know, criticize the Saturn in terms of anything. The way its games looks, the way its hardware functions,
Mhm.
when in comparison to what Sony did.
Mhm.
You know, so instead of the conversation being, oh, the Saturn is this entirely different beast that did things differently, it becomes, well, the hardware sucked because it wasn't like Sony's.
Mhm.
The games sucked because they weren't like Sony's. You know, the advertising sucked because it wasn't like Sony's. You know, I mean, everything was because it wasn't like Sony. You know, and that becomes your narrative. And then once you add about 25 years to that,
Oh yeah.
hell, yeah, you know, it becomes the overwhelming,
Oh.
you know, consensus that everything about the Saturn failed, was bad, wasn't done right,
Right.
because it was done differently than the one machine that basically succeeded at every single level, you know, in comparison to that. And I think that it really does come down to that. It's just comparison, comparison, comparison.
Mhm.
And that really is a shame, because that comparison for a lot of folks takes away their objectivity to come into the Saturn and experience it for what it is,
Mhm.
instead of what it failed to do against Sony.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah, my 10-year-old doesn't care. Like, all of it's old to him, and it all looks janky as hell. You know, so he comes in and he plays like Shining Force 3, and he's like, wow, this is great. I love all the colors, you know, or I love all, you know, the funny characters. Bear my Arctic blast, you know. He gets into all that stuff, you know, and he doesn't care. Like, he has no idea. But yeah, so you're right. I caught myself doing it just a second ago. I said the Saturn's marketing was a failure, right? Not in Japan though, right?
Yeah.
So there, and that's the thing, is I had like a Freudian slip there and completely forgot. Oh yeah, no, the Saturn's marketing was great in Japan. So it's like, if you were a Japanese gamer and you grew up with that, now you're having like heavy nostalgia for the Saturn, this console you grew up with that had great marketing with like Sagata, everything like that. It really is all relative. And I think, you know, like I say, the Western narrative just kind of tends to control everything because it's so loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know, and I also found that in the UK, at least, it felt like it only went one way, where the successes of the PlayStation were celebrated in comparison to the Sega Saturn,
Mhm.
but not so much the other way. And it was like, even when the Saturn did get a win, like an undeniable win, that it was kind of, there was a caveat to it.
Mm.
So, I mean, going back to kind of British TV again, we had a show, Games Master, and the big three were getting reviewed. And, you know, this, you've got Sega Rally, you've got Virtua Fighter 2, you've got Virtua Cop, all being reviewed on the same show, obviously all amazing games. And that came with the caveat, oh, finally, Sega Saturn has some games on there. It's been a barren, you know, it's been, good games have been hard to come by on the Sega Saturn. Was
That's
the
right.
opening Gambit on there?
Right.
And even, did that really need to be said? Was that even true? Because, you know, there was good games on the Sega Saturn. How can you discount Panzer Dragoon, Virtua Fighter Remix? You know, even if people had issues with the original Virtua Fighter port, Remix answered a lot of those questions.
Yeah, that remark is so damaging to their reputation, and little kids are like listening to that and just like getting brainwashed, like, oh yeah, Saturn bad, so
Absolutely.
PlayStation good. You know, like,
So there's these three gigantic games for the Saturn, which at the time, was there anything even comparable to those three games on the
No.
PlayStation? You know,
no.
I've been looking at things like the African Rally game and all these other, like Colin McRae V Rally, everything that tried to be Sega Rally for the years after on the PS1. There was nothing like
Garbage.
on PS1.
Yeah.
Tekken, it wasn't as on the level of Virtua Fighter until the third one.
Right.
And there was, you know, Time Crisis was years after Virtua Cop, and even then.
Mm.
So there was nothing like that on PlayStation. But instead of saying, look at these three games, they're incredible, you've got nothing like this on any other console, it's like, yeah, these are good games, but there's nothing else. You know,
That's the thing as well. These three games that they're reviewing, they're coming 6 months after, or 7 in the US, after the launch. Like, within the first half of the first year on sale, you're getting the three biggest Model 2 games at that time coming to the home, coming utterly intact, amazing ports, doing stuff far beyond anything that's on show on any of the consoles available, any system period. But yet, as Dan says, that caveat was, well, good games on Saturn have been thin on the ground recently. As if, like, really? Well, I played Panzer Dragoon back in August, mate, and it was absolutely sensational. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. It's almost like there was this, I don't want to say collusion, but there was this unanimous decision that we all agree we hate this guy. This is the dude that we're going to, shun, maybe it was good press or something. Maybe it just made for a good story. But it was like Sega was the darling 1 second, and then it was like, okay, we've all unanimously agreed that we're going to shun them and make little remarks about, here and there. Like you said, Dan, unnecessary remarks, completely unnecessary, but let's just sprinkle that in to just add salt to the wound. Yeah. And again, people hear that, kids hear that and they internalize that message, and then when it comes time to ask their parents what to get them for Christmas, they're not asking for Sega because the cool people on TV don't like it. So, I'll be damned if I'm going to be seen with a, Saturn. And then it's like a never ending cycle because nobody has it at school because nobody's getting it. So then you don't want to be the kid at school who's the only kid who has it, so it's like this feedback loop,
Yeah, we said before how both me and James, when we bought, so obviously James played the Saturn on the UK launch at his uncle's and then got his own in '96, and I got mine in '90. Initially, I was saving for a 32X, and when that died down, I saved up a bit more and got a Sega Saturn in the UK, which was November '96. And I went into the store and they were like, "Are you sure you want to Sega Saturn?" I was like, "Yeah, well, that's what I've saved my money for. That's what I've been saving for well over a year, all my pocket money and my paper round money. Were you sure what you should do is get a PlayStation?" But I was like, "No, I don't want a PlayStation. But you need to play Crash Bandicoot." "I don't want to play Crash Bandicoot. I want to play Nights into Dreams." But that was the mentality. I mean, the Saturn and Sega were fighting this unending war against not just the media, the press, printed television, but also retail as well had this preference to, and I don't know how much of that was just embedded in the fact that the perception was that the Sega Saturn was inferior. But Christmas 1996, it was the lineup of the Sega Saturn that year was absolutely astounding. I think it's one of Sega's biggest years in terms of video game output. The sheer number of outstanding games that came to the Sega Saturn that year. I look at that. And we're just talking about the West at this point. The sheer number of classics that came out in the Sega Saturn in the West is amazing. And I think that all just got lost in that sort of noise, which is, a shame. But that's another success that it had, is that it had this fantastic software, albeit unfortunately at the time it's completely overshadowed with all this noise around its perceived hardware issues, its perceived commercial performance, which really was just noise, but it obfuscated the stuff that it was doing so well.
And that's what it must have been. That must have been weird as well for Mel, because like you're sitting there, right? You're a kind of young adult at that point. You're working away. You've imported your Saturn. You're playing these amazing games, possibly more so than even the media guys who are reviewing them, because they're maybe not getting that kind of night and day excitement, hands-on feeling that you're getting. So you must be sitting inside this little kind of bubble of your own, looking outside, going, like, where is this coming from?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it was actually kind of infuriating, to a certain degree, because I was in probably the best situation a person could have been in at that time. When the Saturn comes out, you have to understand, I'm nearly 20 years old. I'm out of the house. I have my own job. I'm a little bit older at this point, so I'm in control of my own money. But even better, my two best friends are in the same exact situation I'm in, and they love Sega too. So they import the Saturn. So it's not just me, but two of my best friends constantly drawing from the import market the best games that are coming out. We are playing this stuff literally days after it launches in Japan. So we would get it. And, it was the same with everything those first couple of years, because, as the first couple of years, you're getting releases that are spaced enough, away from one another, where we were able to get pretty much every big release a couple days after it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting this, and of course I'm extolling these virtues of how great these games are to my friends and the people at Babbage's was the electronics software store back then, and I'm telling everybody that I work with, wow, the Saturn is so cool, you're gonna love this thing, you need to get it when it comes out. And of course, the narrative opposite of that was every gaming magazine was saying, well, games are looking weak, PlayStation is this, that, and the other, it's so good. Basically my narrative was vastly different than the narrative coming from the usual suspects that people got their news from. And, you really have to remember back in those days, the kind of damage that could be done to a brand, because you got your gaming news from what? You got it from game magazines, of which there were only a handful that you had access to. You got them from the guys at the software stores, which, typically if you lived in a small area, there were one or two game stores if you were lucky. Where were you getting your news from for anything that you didn't own yourself? There were precious few points of interest where you could absorb opinions about things. So if those opinions were always negative or always, sort of, branded, making one seem dire and the other one seem that it was just on this great trajectory of success, of course, that's what most people ultimately would believe. I mean, think about it for a second. What stakes did Sony have in video games before the PlayStation that made it seem like they were ever going to do anything successful?
Right.
In Japan, they put out some, they were involved with the MSX, but none of that mattered in the West. Sony's publishing arms, where Sony ImageSoft,
not
what
great.
did they really,
yeah,
what did they put out that proved anything? So where did this enormous narrative come from all of a sudden that the PlayStation was going to rule the roost? And when you look back on it, it almost has to be, almost everybody were graphics whores. It was games like Toshinden. They were looking at that and they were going, wow, textured mapped fighter.
Mesh versus
so
transparent.
Cool.
Yeah, like the comparison deal again,
Exactly.
We're still graphics whores. YouTube channels all about comparing the two side by side. Which is better? Who gives a crap?
Yeah.
The retail thing is real, and Dan and I can attest to that from a UK slant 100%. As I say, I've joked so many times about the shop Game Zone. It was a kind of small independent kind of game shop in Partick in Glasgow, and like during the Mega Drive era, they were just so Sega focused. Like they had a bit of their store where it was like half of it was at two entrances, and one half was for consoles, the other side was for PC and home computers. And whenever you into the console part, they were just like, oh, Sega Mega Drive, woohoo! But then whenever obviously like kind of PlayStation launched, they went totally the other way. And like at this point, having access to the Saturn at my uncle's house and playing Virtua Fighter, Panzer Dragoon, and knowing how great these games are, and I'm actively watching the two guys that worked in this store like take people away. Like if people come in to inquire about a Saturn, like Panzer Dragoon's running on like a smaller CRT, but they've got Ridge Racer on the other side of the store, or a bigger one. And if people dared to kind of be mesmerized by the flapping wings of the dragon, they would be, consciously led over to, the PlayStation. Or would you like to see, this is the Sony PlayStation? And I think in the UK that there was a romanticism around Sony. I think because of their kind of that high end, hi-fi TV kind of branding that
They had a
Walkman
pedigree.
as well.
Yeah, they had that, and I still remember that another chain store who's disappeared now was Comet, was like a kind of like a big electronics store. And Dan, I've told this story before in our show, but I literally watched. This would have been around mid to late '96, and I was in with my best friend Sam at the time, and I'm watching, and the Sony Rex, his wee Sony lapel badge, and he's taking the now on the front of the shelves. They always had the kind of the console name, so you underneath each kind of shelf, and he's taking the Saturn one out, he's sliding that out, and he's sliding the PlayStation one in, and he's rearranging games, and Saturn ones are getting moved lower, and obviously he goes to walk away, and me being this kind of cocky 16-year-old at the time, I start moving the Saturn games back up and putting the PlayStation ones lower down. I'm undoing his work, it's like, but that in itself is something that's always stuck with me, that they even had reps going into stores like consciously rearranging how games were displayed, perceived to the public walking in. Like at eye level, they wanted you to walk in as a consumer and see the PlayStation stuff first. It's like whenever Virtua Cop came out, I remember when I got my copy of Virtua Cop as a gift from Uncle with the Virtua Cop, the Virtua gun, the Sega Stunner, you guys called it. And it was on the bottom shelf of a place called W.H. Smith. They had a games department downstairs. This is a brand new Model 2 port release. One of the hottest games to hit the market. It's on the bottom shelf, and it's beautiful bundle case. And I'm like, how is that even fair? So yeah, the media was one part, but retail and in the UK, it was undeniable that the scene around it was just the buzz around the whole Sony getting into gaming was massive. But yeah, as Mel said, what pedigree did they have in gaming coming forward? To
just a brand, a really strong brand.
Yeah,
but
just a strong brand. But the image stuff like Mega CD software, I think was a big thing that they did, but they didn't have any kind of powerful.
They didn't do anything though, really. I mean, the image stuff they just published. It was other studios that developed stuff, and that was the story for most of the PS1 era. I mean, what were the true third party games on the PlayStation? Really very thin on the ground.
The thing is, I thought the PlayStation was impressive when I first saw it. I'm not gonna lie. I went in, I saw the PlayStation first, okay, because it was, again, Saturn was wherever it was definitely not on my radar, and the retail institution were keeping it that way. I found the PlayStation was incredibly impressive, and it made a good first impression. But what I'm hearing from you guys and what I'm getting, I can only speculate whether there was actually any kind of like money changing hands, any kind of initiative. It's possible. It wouldn't be out of, the realm of possibility for Sony to, spend some money putting reps out there to make their presence more prominent, and they certainly would have had the money to do that, whereas Sega didn't have that kind of extra cash to spend on that kind of stuff after, pretty much exhausting their resources across multiple consoles and then the marketing that they did do. But, it's like, despite any mistakes, despite any missteps that Sega themselves took, it sounds almost like the press and retail institutions were determined for the Saturn to fail too. Like they decided, they're like, look, here's how it's going to go. You're going to go down in the fifth, okay? And you're going to make it look like an accident, So it's like, but that's how it's going to go.
Dave's got like the Marcellus Wallace kind of vibes on here.
Right? I'm
in
just
the
saying,
fifth, your ass goes down.
It just, it just seems like it was already decided, Games Master decided, everyone decided, this is the failure console. We're going to continue to beat that horse and tell everybody that this is a failure. And meanwhile, Tom, Sega of America and Japan, there's like, look, we've got good games. Like, look at this, just take it for what it is, but nobody would. Virtua Cop, like you said, great game, but it goes to the bottom of the shelf because we've already determined that you're going to lose this round, this generation.
I mean, it's probably not even anything as sinister as Money Under the Table. I mean, the Sega Genesis Sega Mega Drive was a massive success at the time, and that took on what was a very dominant Nintendo, extremely dominant, especially in the US. And Sega was kind of this upstart. And I think there was a lot of success because obviously Sonic was cool, Streets of Rage was cool, and Mega Drive made it all look cool. And they were the cool guys, the cool underdog, taking on this market leader that some people wanted to talk, but not everyone. There was people that were pro Sega and there's a lot of pro Nintendo. I think when Sony came along, they were then the cool underdog. Apart from they weren't really an underdog at all. They were a huge conglomerate that could outspend Nintendo and Sega. And I think that's probably more of a factor that they were the ones that people were like, let's get behind this guy. But the sheer strength of that contender when they've entered the gaming arena just accentuated all the noise that people were making. And all of a sudden these people that are saying, no, let's get behind them, let's see what they can do. Kind of like people did, in the Genesis NES era. Becomes much more magnified and so much higher. And then these guys that were never into Sega, that were pro Nintendo, or just some Games Master magazine, for example, did seem anti Sega. I remember reading a Sonic 2 review that gave it 60% and said Sonic will never be as good as Mario, which again, we talk about unnecessary comments. That's the sort of thing that we're seeing there. And that stuff gets behind the PlayStation as well, because the Nintendo 64 is years away. So it may not be anything as sinister as Money Under the Table or stuff.
I'm speaking more metaphorically. I'm not suggesting there was any kind of like foul play like that. But what I am suggesting is that subconsciously, okay, everyone had pretty much already come to this foregone conclusion that Saturn was weaker. Or that Sony was better. And well, like you said, like who says Sonic can't be as good as Mario, right? But they're stating it like it's a fact, right? And it's like it's not even up for debate. So it's like you keep churning out messages like that, and it's like everybody's gonna start believing it or just accepting it out of hand, even if there were some poor impressions of like Daytona USA and the pop-up or whatever, right? It's like you just like throw the baby out with the bathwater and you said, okay, well, we didn't like that, so we're not going to give them any other second chance. It's like, I mean, every company puts out some weak games and then some more strong games, but it just felt like that set the tone. And then after that, it was like you said, it didn't feel like Sega was really getting a fair shake.
Absolutely. So
again, part of their quote unquote failure, I think the press and the media had a huge part to play.
And that's probably the worst part of it is because, the press, the media, whatever you want to call it back then, their job was to protect us from that type of narrative. Their job was to, you were supposed to tell us when a game was good. You weren't supposed to just say, oh, this game looks bad, so therefore it's bad. Even if a game is an ugly game, if the game plays well, why in the world are you not saying this game is awesome? It's like, just because it didn't look the way you wanted it to look. And I think right from jump, that was one of Sega's biggest problems. Their Virtua Fighter, no matter how much you may love that gameplay, and I want you to know I am a very big Virtua Fighter fan, and I feel it played infinitely better than Toshinden in every single way. The fact of the matter is that Sega put out a flat shaded polygon game against a textured mapped polygon fighter that had 3D backgrounds. No matter which way you spin it, no matter how you try to put it out there, you put those two images in gaming magazines, and to the readers, it's going to look like the PlayStation is the thing to buy. Now, where the gaming magazines failed us was to tell us that Toshinden played like dog shit. And the fact of the matter is that Virtua Fighter was an way better playing game. I don't care what anyone has to say. I will die on that hill. And the fact that gaming magazines didn't stress that, hey, Toshinden is pretty, but Virtua Fighter is definitely the better game. Nobody, or I won't say nobody, but very few publications really seem to do that. Every publication doubled down on the visuals and then really just kind of just overlooked that Toshinden played the way it did. Like
Mhm.
Toshinden had like no discernible combo system. Everything felt separate. Everything felt janky. It ran, the animation itself was poor. I mean, why in the hell was this game getting a pass just because another aspect of it looked so good? I mean, I don't know. I always, kind of pissed about that.
No,
And it was
you're
the
right.
same way. It was the same way with Ridge Racer too. I thought Ridge Racer was a good game. I liked Ridge Racer.
It is a good game. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a good game. And to really put that up against Daytona, nobody was telling you about what made Daytona as good as it was. Nobody was really concentrating on just how much better Daytona played, or the fact that there were so many other cars on the track. Like, everybody loves to talk about Daytona not being a great conversion, but what they don't talk about is, could the PlayStation have put 40 cars on the screen and done it that much better?
That's insane.
Because it
is insane.
It couldn't have.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody ever touches upon it. But the fact of the matter is that if you had ported Daytona to the PlayStation at that time, that early in this console's life, with 40 cars on the screen, it would have had loads of pop in, and there's no fucking way it would have been 60 frames per second.
And people love to talk about that frame rate, but God, like, did anybody else put that many cars on the screen with AI, like actual AI that like does something? It's crazy.
Edge, that Edge review is the only one I've seen again where they do mention, and I think the line, if I remember, says that with 40 cars on track, there is next to no slowdown, which is an impressive technical endorsement of the machine. That's the line that they use. And also coming back to Mel's point about Virtua Fighter 1, when Edge reviewed the Japanese copy of Virtua Fighter, they gave it a 9 out of 10. And the tagline for their review, the main takeaway, is this is the first true next generation game. So again, like, always found the Edge, especially in the early days, were very complimentary of the Saturn, especially on the kind of import side of stuff that they got. But as the generation wore on, obviously you've seen the impact of like the PlayStation and N64. But yeah, that point about 40 cars on track, for Daytona. And that's the thing I've said to Dan so many times about as well. You look at the cars in Ridge Racer, they're very blandly detailed. It's maybe two-tone colours, maybe a number on the side. If you look at the cars in Daytona, okay, yeah, it's pixely and it's, it's just the Saturn's way of drawing graphics, but every one of those cars has got different decals, different patterns.
Yeah.
Like, and the AI that's in there, it's like, they're not just fighting you. Like, if you crank that difficulty setting up, they are taking each other out. Like,
no SGL either. Like, that's bare metal coding right there.
Yeah, and they're literally just battering lumps out each other. Like, if they want that line going into that last hairpin on 3.7 Speedway, you ain't getting into that line. They are taking that and they're putting you in that wall. It's like, and they dumbed that down for later versions as well. Like, no other version of Daytona, possibly until the 360 PS3 version, had anywhere near that level of AI in the rival cars. So
I don't think it could be understated. It was the multimedia generation, right? And Mel was absolutely right. Hit the nail on the head. We were graphics whores. The graphics were all that mattered. There was a dark age of gaming where gameplay actually wasn't the most important thing in a game, Like, and thank God we're past that, but I really felt that way. Like, in the mid 90s, I felt like all anybody cared was how good are the graphics, so you would get some really shit games that looked shiny, but you can only polish a turd so much, so like when you got to the gameplay, they sucked, but they'd get great reviews because they look good in screenshots or whatever, right? And Toshinden is a great example. That is a stinking pile. I do not choose to play that. Like, I have a copy of like Toshinden URA on the Saturn, just to own it. But like, I never put that thing on. Like, I'm going to play flat shaded Virtua Fighter any day of the week over that, And the thing is, because now we're so far ahead that it's like graphics don't really matter, you know, on this. We're graphics agnostic now. But back then, it just can't be overstated how important that was. You know, graphics were everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of the success aspect as well. No, because we're almost touching on that defending why it failed kind of thing rather than celebrating the successes. And one of the major successes for me is obviously bringing home. You know, Sega's always been about bringing the arcade home, but they were leading the way in arcade technology. First with Model 1, and then Model 2 with Daytona launching, public testing in '93, then launching '94. Taking things so much further than anybody had ever seen before in the arcades. And Sega dared to try and bring that home within a ridiculously short period of time. And that for me is one of the key successes, is that it did manage to bring home, okay, with concessions, but you can't tell me, as I say, whenever my uncle threw that door open and showed me Virtua Fighter running on his 50-inch rear projection TV hooked up to his home cinema, and I heard that fight one, oh my God, I got goosebumps, like, because he takes me to the arcade every Saturday. I would play the arcade version. Like, there's no one at that point at 16 years old, 15 years old, that's telling me that that's not the arcade version. Like, we didn't have like Digital Foundry, for example. Amazing channel, does great work in its comparisons, but no one had that level of technical insight and comparison back then. So as I say, he found that door open. I'm seeing Akira and Jackie standing there. You're hearing that amazing audio, and I'm just like, oh my, it's Virtua Fighter in the house. Like, how have Sega done this? It's like that to me, and the fact that has stayed with me into my 40s, that I can still think about that and smile, that memory means that much to me today, that's a success. No gaming company has garnered that level of feeling and emotion for a single moment. And Sega's history with myself, going from Saturn through to Dreamcast, is littered with moments like that, just memories that I can pull back on. And it's mainly because of that arcade to home crossover. So that's a roaring success on a personal level for me.
I think that you can still talk about graphics and Saturn's success, though, in the same sentence, you know? Like, if you're talking about games like Winter Heat and Decathlete and Knights, that was the game that hooked me originally. Like, I saw that and I thought it was gorgeous. Burning Rangers,
Panzer's Vi at the time.
Panzer's Vi, exactly. Like, just amazing. I mean, so the Saturn has brilliant graphics. Dragon Force, you know, I mean, like, there are some games that just scream on the Saturn in terms of graphics, but it's like I say, if everybody has already kind of decided that the graphics suck, you know, it's like nobody's giving it any second looks, you know, and so I definitely think that the Saturn is successful for having excellent graphics, you know, and I just think that that's just one of those narratives that, yeah, you know, sure, there's some games that underperform, but then there are some other games that like more than make up for it, you know. The VDP2 of Last Bronx, you know, I mean, just come on, you're not going to get anything like that on the PlayStation. You know, and I absolutely love Last Bronx. It was one of those games that just got me fired up as a kid, you know, just because of the weapons and just how fast it moves. Like, I couldn't believe that. Like, just that fluid movement. I didn't get anything like that on the PlayStation. I don't even think Tekken had just a more clunky and heavy feeling to it, you know, but these Sega fighters were just so quick and snappy, you know.
Dave, you touched on VDP2, and both Dan and Dave, you touched on Panzer's Vi, and Dan, you'll remember whenever we spoke to John Linneman, that we went into VDP2 a fair bit on that show with him, and I'd mentioned that VDP2 draws a perspective correct infinite plane of 4096 by 4096 resolution, and John on the fly worked out around, I think it was like 15 screens worth. Like, in terms of, you know, if you take the Saturn's native resolution and then you fit that into that size of infinite plane, you had up to around about 15. Was it 15? He said, wasn't it 15?
Yeah, it's about 15. Yeah. You worked
15
it out.
schemes worth.
Just sat there and just went.
I just worked it out. But
What was the number? What was the number? 40.
If it's 4096 by 4096.
4096 divided by.
It says it's like 15 or so screens.
Okay.
I've just.
Okay, yeah. So it's like.
I've just give Dave a maths exam question.
You're right. It is between. It's like 14 screens.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So again, that's insane. That explains the incredible draw distance. Like Panzer's Vi, that stage whenever you first go off the edge and your dragon learns to fly, and then you go off in the distance, you're up in the clouds, and the peaks are through peeking through the top of the clouds, and you're just seeing for miles, absolute miles. And VDP2 is an absolute wonder of a chipset.
That's what I couldn't understand when I saw Panzer Dragoon Zwei for the first time and I played it. And I just thought, this is just freaking amazing. Like, I really did feel like I had never seen another game do anything like that. And I was like, how come this is such a secret? Like, how come it's just like nobody cares and nobody's talking about it? It's just me and my little brother playing these games, but they look and sound amazing. Definitely not a failure in that regard,
But it's all about the lead off, isn't it? It's how it starts.
Mm-hmm.
And Sega really didn't start things the same way Sony did. Sony put the better looking games first. They put their best foot forward visually.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that made a difference. It really got people excited for the PlayStation. And Sega didn't have to do that in Japan because Virtua Fighter was already exceptionally popular there.
Yeah.
Now, but you see, it was entirely different in the West.
Mm-hmm.
In the West, Virtua Fighter didn't have the same popularity. So they were going up they were going up against an entirely different beast.
You guys are kind of the exception. You guys are huge Virtua Fighter fans, but you're kind of the exception in the West.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah.
They really should have led differently. Like maybe Virtua Fighter, the original one, never should have come out in the West. Maybe it should have been remixed right from the get-go. Maybe the pack-in should have been Daytona, or the pack-in should have been Panzer Dragoon, just to put it out there that, hey, this is what Saturn games are going to look like. Maybe not focus so much on the flat-shaded Virtua Fighter initially, at least. Because you have to remember, it's amazing that the Saturn was able to give you a flat-shaded Virtua Fighter 1, and then less than a year later, hell, really 7 months later, you got Virtua Fighter 2, which was textured, it was high-res, and it was 60 frames per second. That's the kind of thing you want to lead off with when you're bringing a console out, boy.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing you want to go, this is what we have. Sony has nothing like this. And that all trails back to, of course, that early launch where Sega maybe didn't have the right software ready. So, you can trail all this stuff back. We can say, the Saturn was a success with this, the Saturn was a success with that. But the reason I think that a lot of people do talk about the mistakes is because you can still connect them all to a mistake of some kind, and I think that's where the dominance of Sega failed, because even with Sega fans, a lot of Sega fans are like, why didn't Sega do this? Why didn't Sega do that? And that becomes your narrative right there, especially years later when everybody's looking back on it retrospectively and they're going, well, why didn't Sega wait till it had Virtua Fighter 2 or Remix ready in the West? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? It's kind of a circle, isn't it? It's like, oh, the Saturn is great. The Saturn is, so much better than people give it credit for. And it could have been so much better had Sega just fucking done this,
That's true, yeah.
And it makes you want to scream, kind of,
And then nowadays you get people who criticize it for how expensive it is or how expensive its games are, like, it's like, And I mean, we're trying to lower the barriers of entry, with the content that we do and getting the word out, letting folks know that there are options for playing the games. It's not that big of a buy-in to grab a console and You can get them in different shapes and sizes. Well, I don't know about
That's
sizes, but you can get them. You can get a Japanese Saturn. You can get a slightly broken Saturn. You can get one on offer up or eBay or whatever. But the fact is that folks kind of criticize it for all these things that it has no control over.
Yeah.
The number of games printed are the number of games printed. It's your guys' fault. You didn't buy them. But yeah, so you're right. There is a lot of circular stuff going on there, and I don't really know how we break away from that.
You talk about the games.
Yeah, you do.
Talk about the games.
Because Dave, what you said there as well about lowering the barrier of entry, it's like you pick up a Saturn with a broken disk drive for what, maybe 40, 50 quid.
Sure.
You spend £100 on a Fenrir, and that's it. You have
140.
A fully functional Saturn with access to every single game that you could want. And personally, Dan, as well, we've helped people out in the kind of UK retro community with getting access to kind of games, or loading up SD cards for people that have just bought a Fenrir or a satiator or have looked for advice on it. And that's all we can do, is just to try and keep spreading that word, just keep helping people out, help them find the games, because people come in and they might go, oh, I've heard about this Burning Rangers, and they look it up and it's like 300 quid, or Panzer Dragoon Saga's a really popular discussion point, let's have a look at that, or $1,000, and straight away people maybe walk away from the system going, oh, it's just too expensive. But ourselves, yourself, all of the Sega content creators that are out there, just educating people that there are options. And it's almost kind of quite poetic that the Saturn is now possibly the most the Sega console that's at the greatest kind of renaissance, the most amount of options. Like, look, we've also got the Fenrir, we've got the Satiator, the Saru's kind of out there now as well. There's so many mods, we're getting Bluetooth controllers. There's so much happening. I really want someone to please come up with a solution for the Sega Stunner Virtua Gun to work on modern TVs.
Yeah.
See if someone can do that, I'll be in heaven, because my wife will not allow me to get a CRT back in the house. Like, if I was to walk back in with one of those, I have no chance.
You'd be out on the street.
Just get one. That's what I did.
Just get one.
My wife came home and she was like, what the hell is that?
So you gotta what you gotta do is you gotta get her something too. You bring her, you're like, here, but I got this for you, So, but I want to stress something though, that I think is very important. If folks are getting into this console and they're doing the thing where they load up the ODE with just every freaking game on the console, right? One habit that's very easy to slip into is just like booting things up for like 15 minutes, playing a little bit of it, and then switching over to something else. We didn't have that luxury back in the day. When you bought a game, you went in, you either had read something in magazines, you heard some friends talking about it, or maybe you went into the store and you read the back of the game. You looked at the screenshots, but you opened it up, you read the manual, you gave the game a fair shake. You know what I mean? You spent time with that game. And I'm not saying that all the games were great. Some of them were trash, and you figured that out pretty quick. But you could fire up Sega Rally, and you could bounce off the walls a little bit, and you could just come to this conclusion that, I guess games just haven't aged that well, or it's an old retro game. But I mean, like we all know here, like the kind of depth and how great Sega Rally is, right? It really is pretty pick up and play. But I'm just saying, like, I'm using that as an illustration, like, if you're going to download the games, at least, download the manual, read it a little bit, give yourself some context and spend some time with the games, give them their fair due. Because I think that, there's so many great games on the Saturn that deserve your time, Dragon Force was an example of this, where I did not give that game the time that it deserved. It was one of those games that I would burn to a CDR, fire up briefly, what the hell is this? Moving right along, and it wasn't until I really talked to some other people, read the manual. Again, I had like this FOMO. I was like, I don't understand. Why do people love this game so much? I'm missing out, So read the manual, got in the game, realized, holy crap, this is one of the best games on the whole damn console, and then I had to buy a copy, of course, because I fell in love with the game like hard. And that can happen. And I want folks to understand that yes, you can get into the Saturn pretty cheap, you know, and you can enjoy a lot of its games, but it's only when you spend time with those games that you're really going to come to find like the awesome things about each of them. And then you can make that decision like, oh, I really love this specific game. I'll buy like a Japanese copy of it or something, like, so I have a physical copy on my shelf, you know, because I love this game. But, you know, you can dip your toe in. Just don't be firing up a game for 15 minutes and thinking that you have it all figured out.
I think what's key there is community. And I think that's something that we, and especially on your side, Dave, that's something that the SHIRO guys are brilliant at with, you know, with the challenges. A couple of examples, and something that Sega is so good at, and we see this from their earliest days. And then me and James have been involved in kind of Outrun 2 challenges, and the nuance behind the scoring system in there is unbelievable. There's so much depth to this. And it's the same with games like Sega Rally. And we know Sega Rally is, you know, famous just for, you know, how you play it, and James plays that more than anything else. I know you play it an awful lot, and you just shaving those milliseconds off. And it's the same with Nights into Dreams. Yes. It started off with a little friendly competition over the Christmas period where everyone was, and I thought I was okay at the game, and then I was seeing your scores, and it was just seeing that stuff, and it's amazing. It's like there's so much depth to this, and even Touring Car. And I have to admit, I've only played the PAL version, and I'm not the biggest fan. But when I was playing it for the challenge, all of a sudden, the more time I put into that, the more I was thinking, do you know what? I'm actually enjoying this much more than I ever have done. And I think you're right. People can't just, even the games that are kind of one and done, you can play Sega Rally and you can get to the, you know, lakeside course and see the credits and be like, okay, that's it. And that would be kind of like an afternoon. But when you get involved in the community and when you actually start trying to beat those times, because it's games like that, they are just arcade games. They're score attack games. They're from an era where the goal wasn't just to see the credits. The goal was to have your initials blazoned at the top of that leaderboard, you know, for the rest of the day. And I suppose that's part of why it's so special, is because it carries on that tradition, something that you didn't see as much on rival consoles at the time, or maybe even beyond that. But I think, people put in the time into these games, not just the RPGs and the long games, because they too demand your time, but also the shorter ones. You know, those ones really, when you really dedicate yourself to a game on the Sega Saturn, and you find that there's so much depth in there, and then you get involved with the community, that's when you really find like this secret sauce, this that Sega magic that's hidden away. As I say, even Touring Car, you know, I played it for years and just bounced off the walls, and I just think on the PAL version it's a slideshow. But then when I got into the zone, I was like, okay, there it is. There we go. I had to mine a little bit. I had to chip away. I thought I got to the bedrock, but I found that that vein of Sega magic in there, and I think that's important.
I don't want to turn this into a touring car podcast, but the one thing
you don't need any invitation to do that, Dave. Honestly,
I mean,
when it comes to touring car,
the thing is, it's like I went back and I was reading the comments from the developers. You know, Tetsuya Mizuguchi. You know, he led this small team of AM3 folks. You know, they called it AM Annex, and the word annex has this kind of derogatory sound to it, but actually it was really just like this handpicked team of folks that he wanted to develop a game that completely bucked the trend of current arcade racers, which was basically off the rails drifting. You know, that was what was, but he wanted a game that was more about precision and grip driving, right? Which doesn't sound like it would really make a big splash in the arcade. Honestly, it's kind of like the opposite. It's almost like borders on simulation, right? But they worked really hard to develop like this physics model, and they were really proud of it, and they wanted folks to experience this game a certain way. So I went in that, you know, for years I considered it a guilty pleasure, and I actually kind of made apologies for the game, you know, and acknowledged, oh yeah, everybody out there says that it's bad. Yeah, it's not really that great, but I love it personally. Like, no, now I like legitimately full on, I love it, and I think it's a great game. I completely misunderstood it. I threw away my tuning settings because I kept trying to tune the cars so that they would behave like Daytona or Sega Rally. And once I realized that it was like, I saw other folks in our community doing better than I could with my tuning settings, and they were just doing better. And I was like, how are they doing so well? Because they weren't fighting the way that the game wanted you to run. It doesn't want you to slip, so it was like they were using the 3D control pad. They were following the like outside in out typical circuit racing strategies, and they were doing really well with it. And so like I fell deep into that game over the last couple of weeks, and I realized, okay, I'm not going to say that it's a masterpiece like Sega Rally. I feel like Sega Rally and Knights, those are masterpieces. They're art. Like they're almost like perfect games, for what they do as a video game. I think that they're just about as close to perfect as you can get. But I think that Sega Touring Car is actually quite great, and that's just the thing, is it's like it only took me actually spending time with it, to come to that conclusion. And it's like everybody in our community is like, wow, this is such a great game. Yes, it does. The frame rate does dip, especially on Grunwald. It's kind of a bitch, but it's okay. It's not insurmountable, And I mean, I could say the same thing about Daytona, that frame rate really dips on Seaside Galaxy, right? But it's okay. Like I still enjoy that. I still enjoy Daytona as well, so.
See, when you come from playing touring car for an extended period, right? Have fun with this, right? Put touring car on it and play it for like half an hour, right? And have a few runs where you don't hit anything and you're just flying through corner after corner and you're hitting that top speed. Then put Sega Rally on. Oh my God, it's like driving to the shops with your gran.
Yes.
Like, it's like, go faster.
It's
like,
much slower, but
if you come away from it, if you only put Sega Rally on first thing in the morning or daytime and you put that on, that's your first driving game. Yeah. It feels fast, but I think touring car was all, even in the arcades, the pace that game goes at is just ridiculous.
It's kind of unrealistically fast. Yeah.
Does the speedometer not say on the Alfa Romeo at times like 267 miles per hour? I'm like, I had to look at that again. It's not kilometers per hour. It's definitely miles per hour.
Is it
I'm
really?
Like,
wow.
Yeah. I'm like, no.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, that could be, like I say, that same thing goes for Dragon Force. It wasn't until I really spent time with it and I got over those initial impressions of it, and it's like it's so easy to just kind of write a game off based on an initial impression, So folks really need like to delve into the Saturn library and spend some time with its games, because it's got some real gems, And I mean, you can learn all about them on Mel's channel and on SEGAGuys channel. You guys both put out a bunch of great videos about all these cool games.
I think that's Sega in a nutshell, isn't it? It's the Saturn in a nutshell. It's first impressions, first impressions from the Western launch, first impressions from games that people write off after a few seconds. I don't know, Mel, if you feel that's probably kind of a running theme with Sega and the Saturn.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, if you go back and you look at that library, I mean, think about it. How many games on the Saturn, when you first sit down and played it, or you first sat down and played it, it didn't grab you? I mean, my favorite game on the system is Dragon Force.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my friend Nathan, he bought it when it was launched here in the United States. And I remember he's sitting here telling me, on the phone, oh my God, you've got to try this, man. Come and play it. Come and play it. So I go to his house and dude, I'm 20 minutes into this and I'm just shaking my head like, what the hell's going on? I was like, there's this map where nothing's happening. The general you control, you can't move him. It's just the troops basically playing without you. I mean, where's the gameplay at, man? It's like, this game sucks.
Okay, I'm not crazy then. That's exactly what I thought,
Yeah, it was like, man, it's like, this game is not, the way you described it. You were telling me this, that, and the other, and I'm sitting here looking at this, and it just wasn't good. And guys, years would go by before I tried that game again. And I sat down with it and I started messing around with it, and it was the same result, there at the beginning. I'm just like, where is the gameplay at? It was like, I'm not able to control anything. I'm not able to do anything. Where's the action? Why is my general not running out into the field of players and me kicking everyone's ass? You know, it was like, you know, if this is Braveheart, why the hell am I not, you know, out there in the thick of things?
Mhm.
But then, of course, you read the instruction manual,
Right.
and it comes to find out that it really is based on strategy of how you set your guys up, how you defend yourself. You know, you level up and you start to gain these powers. These powers begin to make a difference because as you level up, the computer levels up.
Mhm.
Well, the next thing you know, the computer has Holy Shield, and your 100 troops are completely freaking wiped out in 3 seconds, and you're about to lose this fight. You start to realize that the strategy is the brilliance of the game.
Mhm.
And the next thing you know, I'm hooked. I'm like, oh my God, this game is awesome. You know, this is one of the best games I've ever played. I've never played anything like this on any other console, not before the Saturn, not since the Saturn.
Mhm.
Now, how many consoles can you say that about? Really say that about, that you have played a game that nothing was like it before and nothing has been like it since? That's the reason the Saturn still kicks ass. That's the reason why the Saturn didn't fail. That's the reason why it deserves everybody's respect. And nobody should be talking about it failing commercially 25 years later when the only thing left for anybody to pay attention to are the games,
Mhm.
period. And that's
Spot
how
on.
I feel.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Absolutely agree, 100% there.
And I mean, now you've got this community just creating some awesome, you know, translation patches and homebrew and stuff for the scene, you know, for the Saturn, and I'm, you know, like, that isn't to take anything away from what's been done over on the Nintendo 64 or the PlayStation. I know those communities exist. But I mean, you know, the Saturn's like firing on all cylinders. These folks, like, they love the console, they love the challenge of programming for it, and you know, it's definitely a scrappy community that's like creating some cool stuff for it. And it is an uphill challenge. Like, I won't deny, like, and I think everybody knows that, you know, it's definitely got its obstacles, you know, in programming for it. There are a few like key things that always come up, you know, the bus contention issue, you know, or like, you know, figuring out how to use VDP2 to your advantage, you know, even as a homebrew developer and stuff like that. So, but the thing is, all these folks are up to the challenge, you know, and they're doing some amazing stuff with it. And then of course, like the translations and patches and even full English voice localizations. That's crazy. Cause there you go again, Mel. What other console has a team doing like full voice localizations? There have been like one or two of those, not at the same caliber of Bulk Slash or Stellar Assault. Those things like stand alone, you know. So that's another way that it's unique.
Yeah, that community that are behind all the kind of mod stuff, the homebrew stuff. I mean, it's almost kind of, I don't know, poetic or some kind of justice almost, that it seems to be that of all the Sega consoles, and I know the Genesis has got a lot of really great stuff going on, you know, like Mega R-Type, Final Fight MD, but that the Saturn's the console of all of them, you know, all the Sega consoles, that's the one where the focus in the community seems to be. It's like the things that we're seeing being done. I bring up Cold Case, you know, from the homebrew competition. I think that is an amazing mix of Silent Hill and the medium. Like, if you look in the mirror and you go into the mirror and you can rotate the camera and you see the two sides of both dimensions, that's straight out the medium, that someone's tried to take a concept from modern gaming and apply that to the Saturn, and it does a great job of it. I just think it's just brilliant to see that it's the Saturn that it seems to be the focus for so many ambitious projects.
Yeah.
And you know, the Dreamcast, an absolute powerhouse, but a lot of the stuff we see on that, and I know it's got an amazing indie scene, and indie is important, you know, in terms of giving people a platform to cut their teeth and get into game development. But a lot of the stuff we see on Dreamcast is like NES style ports, and there's nothing wrong with
Beats
2D,
of Rage and shmups and stuff like it took the scene like 10 years to break into 3D, right? On the Dreamcast, you're like, here's a console that's like could do 3D in its sleep. It took the scene like a decade to crack into 3D, but with the Saturn, everybody's like, let's just do some 3D on it, you know?
But it's like even the Dreamcast stuff that is 3D, like the Arcade Racing Legends, man, that was just janky as hell. You know, it didn't look good. And then you look at something like people got Unreal running on the Saturn, for goodness sake. You know, it's like it's like the Saturn's been like unlocked and people are showing people, look what it can really do. Look what potential's in this box. Whereas like the Dreamcast has got all this potential, is easier to program for, but it's kind of homebrew scene seems to be quite basic in comparison. And I just think it's great to see that, and that's a major success for me, you know, for the Saturn, is that it's kind of created this community, you know, that's, you know, it's got us involved, you know, Mel got out there to put his narrative out, yourselves launching SHIRO, that it's created people who are passionate about the console, who want to champion it, but there's also some insanely talented people out there that want to go one step further and dig in and find those nips and tucks of the hardware, learn how it works, and bring us some absolutely amazing homebrew stuff. And, you know, you look back at the homebrew scene the last 12, 18 months, the explosion, you know, and again, that's why an ODE is so important, to give you access to all these kind of projects. But you think at where we've come in the last 12, 18 months, what are the next 12 to 18 months going to look like on Saturn? What else are we going to see? It's exciting. It really
that's
is.
The thing. I feel like what do you call it? Like the extent of the Dreamcast abilities is not really a mystery. Like we kind of know what it's capable of at the high end. We've seen it pushed. I mean, you know, there's that urban legend, I guess. I've heard several developers say it. They feel like there's a ton of untapped potential under there. And we really, the console didn't have what you would consider like a full shelf life, you know, for developers to really tap it out, you know, at the very end, the way that like PlayStation did into 99, 2000, 2001, you know, they really would squeeze every last drop out of the PlayStation, right? We didn't have that with the Saturn. So I think that's appealing to a lot of the homebrew developers. That thought of what more potential is there? Like what could we tap out of it, you know? So that's the driving force, I think, behind a lot of it, is it presents a challenge, you know, and that's really appealing, you know?
So I think that ties in with the very spirit of the Sega Saturn itself, because when you think about it, the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation were at the very frontier of 3D gaming. A lot of 3D games on the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation are literally developers trying to figure out what to do in this 3D space. You know, before then, you had a few attempts at the 3DO, but the arcade, Sega's arcade arm, well, you know, arcade games where 3D had really been pushed. But it's come home, and then it's in the hands of not just arcade developers, it's in the hands of everyone. And you've got so many different attempts of what that meant for a 3D space. You've got stuff like Bug, which is, you know, as a platformer, it's kind of unique. You've got stuff like Panzer Dragoon, where you're rotating the camera around. You've got stuff like Nights into Dreams, I think, and you look back in the development of that. And I think it kind of ties in with, Mel, what you were saying about there's so many unique experiences on the Sega Saturn. Burning Ranges, there's nothing like Burning Ranges out there, and I think that's all born from kind of the interest in exploring that new frontier of gaming. And I think that filters through, that spirit is still alive in the homebrew community, in that we're exploring kind of the unknown in what the Sega Saturn was only kind of cracked open a few years ago in terms of like the modding scene, and then underneath is this enigma that has been unknown to so many so long. There's so much mystery in there. There's so much untapped success, you know. So in the beginning it was, we're in 3D, developers like, we're in 3D, what can we do? And now it's like, we're only just getting to understand what this console could do. And it is this voyage of discovery, of invention, of imagination that I think filters through. And I think it's that spirit which appealed to me back then, and it's why it still appeals to me today, and why I still love this console, and why it's for 25 years this console has been ever present in my gaming setup. I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
Oh, absolutely. The mystique, right? You called it the mystique.
Yeah.
So the Saturn has this mystique where you feel like you still don't know everything about it, you know? I mean, and a part of that is because it's like with a console like the PlayStation that was so loud, how could you not know everything there is, you know? But with the Saturn, it's like, yeah, it just feels like there's always something new to discover. I discovered a new golf game today that I didn't know about. You know, I thought I knew every golf game on the Saturn, but then, you know, Peter writes up one of his best of Saturn little articles, and I'm like, okay, wow, there's one I need to try. It was another one from T&E Soft. But
that's Japan for you.
Here's Japan for you. Yeah. I mean, like, and I've gone, like, I've poured over the list of the Japanese disc images, you know, multiple times. But when you're looking at all those Japanese names, your eyes start to cross after a little while, and you know what I mean? So it's like, you know, there you go. Like I'm every once in a while, I'm still finding out about some kind of game that I didn't know existed. And you know, sometimes the language barrier is pretty high. So I'm like, okay, that's why I haven't really heard much about it. But that won't necessarily always be the case now that we've got like a pretty crazy community. I mean, I just did this last PRGE. We did a slideshow all about like all the translations that had happened, you know, just since 2019. And it's ridiculous. Like we hardly could get through the whole thing in 50 minutes. It was so many. So, you know, like you said, James, you know, the floodgates have been opened, and who knows what's going to happen over the next decade, you know?
I can't begin to tell you how many times I've watched one of Mel's videos on Japanese Saturn games, and like I'm like listening to him on one side and I'm on a certain website, like Googling the name of it to like try to find the ROM for it. It's like this just happens so many times. Like, what's this game? Japanese? Because like you find it and obviously the name's God unpronounceable, and it's like, oh, then you find it and then you see like Mel's footage of it running. It's like, how have I not seen this before? It's like, but that's just the Japanese library, you know. It's if you go on the certain websites that you need to go to find your ROMs. And Dave, you're right, you can just look through and it's just like a mash of characters. And again, the stuff that Mel does in highlighting those games is fantastic, you know, because that's the kind of thing that needs to be done for the Japanese library. You know, is someone, you know, putting it out there that, you know, try this game out, try that game out, you know, because no one is going to, well, some people might if they get a card big enough. And I think digital hoarding is another topic that's quite prevalent. You know, people will want to just go, I want to get an ODE and just download everything. But, you know, then you kind of get lost and you create a kind of backlog instead of be focusing on a handful of games at once. And I think, again, with Mel recommending certain, you know, Japanese games that you might not know the name of, you might never have heard of, and then you go and try them out and you're like, oh, I would never have tried this if it wasn't for that video. So yeah, that whole community aspect of just getting the word out there about the depth of that library is just vitally important.
Yeah, my brother-in-law recently got a Saturn, you know, and he sent me his satiator and the SD card to have me set it up for him. And it was like I was sitting here thinking, like, what do I put on this? You know, because I want that first impression to be really good. You know, like I want to set him up with like the best experience he possibly can have. So, you know, all killer, no filler, right? You know, we can delve into the filler and stuff like that all we want, but I mean, we're already in love with the console, you know. And it's like for somebody I'm trying to sell it on, I'm like, okay, so what do I put on here? It's got to be all the heavy hitters and stuff that's just gonna like make that big impact, like Mel was saying, that first impression, because he's coming from, you know, he's a PlayStation guy and then definitely an Xbox guy. Never picked up a Saturn controller, I think, before that, you know. So, but he got into it because I was doing this podcast thing, you know. So he's like, you know, I wanted to support you, and I was like, that's awesome, you know. So, there's just so much good stuff to discover on this crazy 32-bit proprietary computer. Basically, that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, even between the Western regions, there's so much on there. There's stuff that we got that you guys didn't.
True,
and I was just saying, you know, I didn't really know a style until I started watching Mel's videos, because Sega Europe just decided not to release it over here.
Yeah.
You know, it got a small window on a bootleg sampler, which I didn't have at the time. I never saw it, and then was just kind of shuffled out. We never saw it. So you've got the differences between, you know, the PAL and the NTSEU regions, and then you've got this huge library of Japanese games, and it's just we introduced a guy called Jason to the Sega Saturn, who designed our logo, and he just referred to it as an Aladdin's cave when he started going through the games. And it's funny because there's something there for everyone. Sometimes it's hard to pick out what the heavy hitters are, because those heavy hitters vary from person to person.
Yeah.
Out of everything, I think the game that made him fall in love with the Saturn was the translated version of Police Noughts. So there's just and there is that diversity and that breadth of games on there that really is, it really can't be overlooked, because compared to other consoles that came out that generation, it really does have every single genre covered, doesn't it?
But Jason as well, just that thing that is also really important, and something that we bang the drum about as well, is when you do come to the Saturn as a kind of newcomer, is just go in with a completely open mind, and just let the system work its magic on you. We recorded last week with yourself and Nick, and that's one of the things I complimented Nick on, is that he jokes that he was shitting his pants when the Saturn came out. It's like his long-standing joke, but he's come to it with such a freshness and an open mind, and has just allowed the console to work its magic, to show him what it can do. And he's fell in love with it, and he's now creating documentaries that are like gold standard stuff in the community. And likewise with Jason, he's someone who totally missed out on the Saturn, but like he even like has that feeling, that kind of that aura, that mystique from it. He feels that vibe as well from it, as someone who didn't have it in the day. And he's loving going through it, finding new games, and like even he gets annoyed whenever he hears slants against the Saturn, and he wasn't even there to defend it in its day.
Right.
He didn't have one. He was old enough to have one, but he just didn't. And even he gets annoyed whenever he hears kind of what he perceives as kind of narratives against it, because he's went in and accepted it, and just let it work its magic as well. So it's a key thing, because you hear too many people will come to, as you say, pick a game up, go, oh, pop-in's bad, frame rate's bad, controls are janky, next, let's try something else, and just don't give it the time and the appreciation that it deserves. And that's the one thing. Now, most of the people listening to this will be Sega and Saturn, nuts. They'll just
sure.
But there might be the odd person who comes across this, and maybe the title of the video gets them intrigued, and they tune in, and hopefully that passion that's emanating from us, maybe becomes a wee bit infectious, and you just do let the Saturn kind of work its magic, because there is too many narratives out there of quick hit, first impression, this is dog shit, next kind of mentality. So yeah, just if you are coming to it fresh, just let it work its magic. Don't think about 4K. Don't think about ray tracing. Don't just ignore the technology that's come, since 1995. The Sega Saturn is an experience like no other in gaming, as far as I'm concerned. There's a game, there's a genre, there's an experience for absolutely everybody on that platform. You just have to let it tell you what it is.
Yeah, you just enjoy it for what it is. And read the manual. Please read the manual, because a lot of the depth was hidden in those manuals, let me tell you. Like this is the old school. This is what they used to do. They used to, like, Sonic Team themselves would hide like whole systems in the game and not tell you anything about it in the actual game. But you read the manual and you're like, oh wow, I didn't know I could do this, Hell, even with Sega Touring Car, you can like train the AI car to win the match, and then when you do that, you unlock like the master. You become like the master of both sides of the game. But it doesn't mention that at all, like anywhere in there. So it's like I wouldn't have even known. I just happened upon it, and I was like, AI car, interesting, So it's like Sega would hide a ton of goodies in the manual, and like Mel said with like Dragon Force, it's important to read the manual. You can go to Sega Retro and they have scanned manuals for all these games, and it adds so much, so like Joe, Sega RPG fan, I was talking to him the other day, and he said anytime he plays like a new Saturn game, he reads the manual first, just so that he's like in the loop on whatever, because sometimes that there'd be little things that you just wouldn't know unless you did. So yeah,
that's what you had in the day, wasn't it? That was part. I mean, when you got home, you know, these days you could really do with a manual while you're waiting for
Mhm.
the bloody game to start installing.
Yeah, but the whole
but-
in-game
but the whole-
tutorial was a rare. I mean, that was a new thing that started really becoming very prevalent in the 6th generation. You know, the in-game tutorial that would hold your hand, and then you get to the point where you're like, for goodness sake, can I just play the game? You know,
I was thinking the other day, was Burning Rangers one of the very first to have a tutorial
this is
like
true.
that?
Yeah, and that's on the tail end of the Saturn. You know, it's like you started getting that.
God, I hated that tutorial.
Right? Yes,
too.
yes.
Drives me insane now.
Still to this day, right? You just want to get right into it. You know,
Exactly.
want to fight some fires.
Yeah, it's like, just let me play the game, man. I want to press start and let me play the game.
Oh, that's what Bo Bales, you know, who reverse engineers that game. We need to have him make a patch that'll just be like there's a button combination that you can press that'll just skip the tutorial. That would be a quality of life patch.
You know, somebody told me once in the comments section when I talked about Burning Rangers, they actually told me, they were like, once you start the tutorial, start it, cut the game off, and go back into it. And it will let you pick your mission. The tutorial had been completed.
Oh.
And I've never tried that, but that might be something to try. Yeah.
Okay. Huh.
I might have to try that.
So power cycle, just you have to actually like turn off. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, power cycle it after the tutorial starts. Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, I also the Shining the Holy Ark, man. That sometimes I just want to play a new game of Shining the Holy Ark, but damn, that intro sequence is long.
That opening dungeon is.
It is so.
Shining the Holy Ark is one of my favorite RPGs.
Oh, it's great.
All time.
Yeah,
but that first dungeon is excruciating.
Right.
You know,
and all the dialogue.
Yeah, the dialogue, and then the.
I mean, for the first time, it's great.
Yeah.
But after that, you're just like, why can't I skip this? You know.
And you know, that's another reason that, you know, I think a lot of the Saturn's games, a lot of the games that are special to people, you know, they're not really that easy to get into in terms of your initial first impression. I mean, go back and look at something like Sakura Wars, dude. I mean, there's a good game in there, but my God, man, you can't get past those conversations. You know, if you're not somebody who gives a damn about trying to, you know, bed 16-year-old Japanese girls, dude, it's like, you know, I don't care what this chick is having to say, man. Let me skip to the part where I compliment her or tell her to go the hell away, and then let me see some action, man. You know, it's like, where's the start button at here? Yeah.
That is so funny. And of course, that game is all about the conversations, you know, or at least for a lot of people, because it's a visual novel, you know, but it does have some battle sequences and stuff. But
that's exactly, if you go back and you look at the later games in the series, they actually started to, you know, put a little more into the battle sequences. Right. So it wasn't just about the visual novel.
Well, they even made like Sakura Wars 2, like it gave you this, even when you're in the conversations and stuff, you have to like quickly pick one thing or another, you know? So they must have realized that they needed to like make that part a little bit more engaging, you know?
Yeah. Especially if they were gonna, you know, make that game appeal to a wider audience. Yeah. You just couldn't set people in conversations. I mean, go back and play and time Sakura Wars, the original, the first one on the Saturn, and time how long it takes you to get to where you actually can do something. I
think it's like 2 hours.
Yeah, it's hours, man. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
You know, visual novel or not, man. I mean, good God, man, you could have broke something in 15 minutes in and let me like do something other than hearing these chicks whine about one another, dude. It's like, give me a break here.
Yeah. It's definitely for somebody, you know, like there are some folks who are really all about that part of the game, but I totally hear you. I mean, I'm closer to that the middle where I'm like, I can enjoy a little bit of the conversation and stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely want to get to the battle. I think Pat was like that too. He's like, when do I get to the battle? I'm going to do this 2-hour stream and I haven't even gotten to the battle. So yeah,
some of those games are actually difficult to make videos on too, dude, because you want to make, like, say you're just doing a clip show where you're picking 8, 10, 12 games, and you just want to do a quick, hey, this is what this game is about. And of course, you don't want to fire up a game and have to be in it for 3 or 4 hours to capture what amounts to 90 seconds of gameplay to show it off. So, even showing a Saturn game can actually be tough sometimes. It's like when I show Sega Touring Car. You guys have been talking about that. Sega Touring Car isn't one of my favorite racers on the Saturn.
Right.
And of course, because it goes so long in between when I actually play it, when I start it up again, of course, I suck at it. So, of course, I'm going to tell people about it. Hey, here's Sega Touring Car. And there I am for 90 seconds riding the wall right down the track, because, it goes in between so long when I'm playing it. And I don't think a lot of people understand, man. That's what really, it comes back to what you guys have been saying. You really have to give a game its due. You have to read, learn, understand, find a community that's going to help you play it so you understand it, because not necessarily what you're seeing in a YouTube video, even from someone like me, is necessarily indicative of what this game's potential can be. Now, I can sit down and show you Street Fighter for 90 seconds and make it look like the best game in the world.
Right.
I can show you Dragon Force, make it look like the best game in the world, but not every game I'm going to be able to do that with. I'm not a gaming god, Right. So remember that even if you see a game for the Saturn and it doesn't look that great in a YouTube video, that doesn't mean you're seeing the best that game can possibly be. Yeah. As good as I am in games like Virtua Fighter and Sega Rally, there are people that take it to another level.
Yeah.
They're way better than I am. They'll show you aspects of that game that you will rarely see in a video that I do because they are that good at it. I'm more of the mouthpiece of the Saturn that shows you bits and pieces of everything.
Same. Yeah.
There's guys out there that can show you so much more.
I'm super
get into that. Yeah, get into that community.
I'm super jealous of those guys who are like good at everything, like Double Dime in our community. That dude is just a gamer. Like, it doesn't matter what the genre is. He's good at everything,
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm so jealous.
See what Mel's talking about there, doing like your gameplay videos. That's actually quite refreshing to hear in a way, because like, Dan, how often do we talk about like, and again, because it's a Saturn, you feel that you want to portray it in the best light possible. So like, you're putting a game on to capture some footage, and like, I don't know, when I'm playing a game to capture footage, when I see that record button on the capture card, sometimes I just go to absolute shit. Like, how many times, like, I'm recording Sega Rally, for example, I could play that game with my eyes closed. Dave, I had a discussion with you the other day on Discord. We were literally verbally talking through each corner, what gears to use to take them. But like, I see that record button going, and I'm like hitting walls, and then for fuck's sake, restart again. It's like, come on. It's like, and it takes you like 20 minutes, 25 minutes to capture like a bit of footage that you're happy with, because you know that either A, somebody in the comments is going to go, well, you're pretty shit at that, aren't you? Or B, you're sitting there going, I really want to back up the words that I'm saying in the script here to show why this game's worth your time. And I want to show you it running at its absolute best. But my God, it's like, I don't know, that pressure comes on.
That
like,
kid really scarred you, didn't he? That kid.
Oh, I told you that.
James is doing this competition. He's got a time slot. He's scheduled to do this time slot. He goes in to the store. He's playing the game. What was the game?
The game was, Dan, you've heard this story, the Blockbuster kid for Rage Racer.
Oh, Rage Racer. And this slick, big badmouth kid comes up behind James and is like, you're really shit at that, aren't you? Jesus.
You had three time slots, right? It was like a regional, like kind of heats with Blockbuster, and then the best selection on the table would go down to London to take part like a national final. And you had three slots. You had to book into your local Blockbuster, put your lap, and then that you would set your time in, and that was it. So like my uncle bought me the game. It was like, I'll buy you if you think you're good enough to try and make this final. I'll buy you the game. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm just wanting the game, but like, whatever. And he buys me it, and I'm practicing at home, and I goes down and I puts my first time in, and it was pretty decent. I was like third or fourth or something. That's a good benchmark to start with. And I books in for my second lap. So I goes in and I'm sitting there, and I'm racing away, and out of nowhere, we call them like kind of like Neds. They call it NEDS, like just delinquent kind of young guys with nothing else better to do than insult people in the street. And this guy just wanders in, and I'm sitting on this couch, and out my peripheral vision, he's wearing a yellow puffy, Tommy Hilfiger jacket or something. My peripheral vision, I start to see him come in, and he goes, "Here, mate, you're pretty shit at that game." And I'm like, so I'm hitting walls, and I'm like, oh my God. So like, that time was out the window. I'm raging at this point. The store manager, he's like kind of standing there overseeing times and taking them down. And I'm like, that run doesn't count, right? That can't count. I've been put off. He's like, no, strict time slots. So that run went in the bin. And then I stupidly went, well, put me down for my third run. I thought I would just get the next one in as soon as possible, and then that one went to shit as well. So,
yeah. So you're scarred for life now.
I'm scarred for, mate. I'm recording gameplay footage for the channel.
And you're hearing that kid in
puffy yellow jacket kid is still standing there going, "Yeah, mate, you're pretty shit at that."
I think we all go through that though, don't we? I'm sure. Well, I think I remember you saying before on another podcast or another video that when you're trying to show, the best that a game can be, but then people watch footage of you and people will comment and say, "Oh, I don't think you're that good." But there's you playing a game for content, and there's you playing the game seriously, and they're two different things. And sometimes it's difficult to get that across. And I think nerves is one thing, but I think there is, we're trying to show very specific things when we're trying to capture these games, when we're trying to show this is the best that the game can be. So I don't think it's all just the Yellow Jacket game, James. I think it's probably a variety of things.
It's funny. John Linneman said that when he was doing the Gex video, he had to record Gex on all of the consoles, right? And what's perceived by many to be a negative, the fact that the Saturn did away with a proper save system, it uses passwords, ended up being a really good thing when it came to recording content for this, because you could zip around the game, using passwords instead of actually having to get there on a 3DO controller, and get there through saves, man. So he was like,
that's absolutely true. When you're capturing video, a game that has cheats, where you can skip levels or passwords or something like that, they can be a godsend for you, because it really allows you to go in and capture something specific instead of sitting there and having to play the game, get good at it to get far enough, to get that one piece that you wanted. Recently I did a video on the Super Nintendo, and I had Donkey Kong Country 3 in the video. And everybody kept saying, there's no wonder you don't like the game because you're not running. And what's hard to convey to people is that, well, I was basically going through the level, kind of trying to show it off graphically, because that's mainly why I had it in the video. So I'm sort of meandering through the levels, just sort of showing off the different scenes and the different effects and the different transparencies and all the different things that Donkey Kong Country was known for. And basically it was a graphics game. Everybody, the first thing they thought when they saw Donkey Kong Country was it was a good looking game. So that's kind of where my angle was as to why I had it in the video. And then everybody's like, well, you're no good at that game. You're not running. You're not playing it right. And it's just, sometimes you really just want to be like, look, what I'm trying to capture and show you is completely different from how I would play a game on my own. Or you go into a game when you're relaxed and it's something you're going to put time into, you're going to get a lot better at it versus, oh, I haven't played this game in 15 years. I'm going to throw it in for a gameplay capture. And you play it for an hour, hour and a half, whatever. You're still, you're having to really work to show that game the best it can be, when maybe sometimes you're not trying to show the best it can be. You're just trying to show a certain aspect of it. And people don't take that into account a lot of times, man. And, it's part of making content on YouTube that maybe somebody should do a behind the scenes,
Right.
This is why we do this, this is why things are done this way.
Right.
It's like when I was playing, one time I had somebody tell me I sucked at Sega Rally.
Oh, God.
When
I think that's what I was thinking of. I think that's what you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm sitting there trying to show like the car bopping around the track and hitting jumps different ways and how the suspension is reacting. I'm not really going to be able to show you that if I'm zipping around the curves perfect every time. I'm trying to show you so much that the game has to offer. In a platformer, I'll show you the character getting hit in different animations. I'll show you a death a lot of times in my videos because I want to show you what a death animation looks like. I'm showing you this stuff so you see everything, not necessarily because I'm sitting there sucking at everything I'm trying to play.
But yeah, I mean, you can't read the comments, right? you just kind of, because I swear there's always somebody.
I've considered doing like a Sega Rally video. It's something I've spoke to Dan about, and because actually pausing the game at like certain corners and putting prompts on screen to say why, and doing like a kind of commentary as to why I'm shifting out of that gear and what I'm doing on the controller. But I think that would take me a year to make, because I'd just be hitting restart every 2 seconds, because I'd be so that's something you would have to get like an absolute nailed on run. And I'm not the best in the world at the game. I'm decent at it. I think my best times is like a low 317s on arcade mode. But there's just, I know the gears and the kind of the shift times and stuff on the kind of major corners and stuff like that, and the bumps off of the cars to get those little boosts on kind of like desert stage and stuff like that. That the purple car at the start of Mountain, you can give you a wee boost along that straight towards the first hairpin left as well. But it's like, I'd love to actually do that and just do a video where like you pause at each corner and explain why, but it's just getting the run recorded to actually do that, because it would have to be nailed on. Like any error at all, any clipping of a wall would just be like, there'd just be somebody going, oh, why should I follow your advice? You hit that wall, kind of thing. It's like,
it's that kid in the yellow jacket.
See, scarred, mate. That's that.
Yeah, I agree. That's tough. You just want to like inspire people and encourage people to, love this console like you do, or to love Sega and all of their consoles, But I mean, you do sometimes feel like it's like, no matter what you do, there's a lot of negativity out there. Sometimes it makes you just feel like throwing your hands in the air,
Well, that again is something that we came across, Dan, you and I recently, not naming names, but someone who'd done a podcast. It was a UK podcast, and they admitted in one breath that they hadn't played Sega Rally on the Saturn, or one of the hosts said they hadn't played it. The other one said that the game, that the Saturn was trying to do arcade ports that it wasn't capable of, and that Sega Rally and Daytona were examples of this. And the other guy said, yeah, Sega Rally, great game in the arcade, but shame about the port. And I'm sitting there going, what? It's like, how can, why are you putting that out there? It's like, that stuff just shouldn't be getting put out there. And it's just like, if you haven't played the games, and you can't comment on them. Just please try them before you get behind the microphone and start spouting about them. That's an infuriating thing for me. It's like there's a video as well about Sonic R, and the narrative with Sonic R, oh, shit game, great music. Like, shut up, man. It's like, if you learn how to play that game, if you learn that the bumpers or the triggers are like essentially air brakes, like in Wipeout. They control a limb. Like if you want to turn Sonic that way, you have to press the left, trigger to make him hop onto his left leg and turn them to go to the right. It's like, again, those little kind of nuances of the controls, things that Sega build into their games, or it was Traveler's Tales in this case, but like they're building these things in that there's depth there. These games have got these mechanics built in, but too many people picked up Sonic R and thought, right, it's a Sonic game, and tried to play it like a Sonic game. But like the controls in that game are absolutely ingenious. Like, how many times, Dan, have you and I put videos on X, or like showing us running through stages, not hitting a single wall? Like, yourself, that kind of S bend that Sonic comes to in the first stage.
Mm-hmm.
If you're hitting your bumpers and you time it, you can glide around that. You can make Sonic hop from leg to leg to go around that without hitting anything. It's like, again, oh, the music's great, but the game's bad. No, the game is great. It scored highly back in the day. It's fun. It's got multiple routes. It's got shitloads of unlockables. Like, you can run the game and finish first place, no problem. But then you've got to learn, or you don't want to hit those boost pads, because they take your rings off you, and you need your rings to take that left-hand cut off to open that gate, to go through and take that shortcut to find the coin, to find the Chaos Emeralds.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a video I seen that went, I collected a Chaos Emerald, but it took it off me because I didn't finish first. Well, that's a bit shit. No, that's a gameplay mechanic.
And I think in that same video, they say that the game is too easy. So on one hand, they're complaining that you have to finish first to get the Chaos Emeralds. But on the other hand, they're saying that the game is too easy to finish first place. It's like, but I think it's cutting through that nonsense. There's an awful lot of noise out there, an awful lot of narratives. And, people have different perceptions on things, and that's fine. But it's kind of those ones where the narrative is false. And you've got a very Nintendo, PlayStation centric set of narratives out there. And I suppose that's kind of where, Mel, everything that you've done to kind of preach that Sega narrative, which from YouTube is one that was sorely missing for the longest time. And it's now that this Sega fandom is finally starting to show its voice, and to celebrate the fact that, hey, it wasn't just the Mega Drive or the Genesis that was amazing, and it wasn't just that the Dreamcast was fantastic and burned out brightly but shortly and finished Sega off, but everything in between was amazing as well. The Master System was amazing, and the Sega Saturn for us, was a success. Yes, it wasn't a commercial success for Sega, but for us, it was our favorite game console of all time. It has some of our favorite games of all time exclusive of it, and still exclusive to it. There's games that are kind of trapped on Saturn that you can't play anywhere else, and even games that do come to modern systems, Guardian Heroes and Nights into Dreams, fantastic that they're available for modern audiences now, but they don't play quite like you find them on the Sega Saturn. They were built for that hardware, and that very unique architecture, which it was kind of its Achilles heel in one way, in that it was quite complex, and developers, especially in the West, weren't quite familiar or happy with the way that it was built. But by the same token, it gave us some unimaginably unique experiences, which are still kind of, a lot of them are bespoke for the system and haven't made their way elsewhere. And I think it's sharing that, and us sharing our experiences, our knowledge, and our love for the system, that kind of has to be the counterpoint to all the sort of stuff where people are saying, oh yeah, the Saturn is like the second from bottom best console of all time, because I haven't really played the games, but I heard that it's crap. It's like, yeah, let's move away from what you heard. Listen to our experience and our story. Please understand where we're coming from people who grew up with the system, who bought that system because we loved it and kept it around and still play it because it's extremely special. And this is why it's special, and it's pushing that narrative to act as that counterpoint to all these YouTube clickbait videos that just want to kind of dump on it for a few views.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think it's really important too that even within the Saturn community, even within the Sega community at large, you sort of broaden everyone that you listen to. Go out there and listen to the different opinions. Dude, I fancy myself a Sega fan, but you have to understand, I'm still going to give you only an opinion. I can tell you that I don't like something, but someone else can tell you that they do like something, and they can give you reasons that I could never come up with why you should play the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly why you should always broaden who you listen to. Get different opinions on a game that you might be interested in. Don't just listen to me. Don't just let me tell you that, this Saturn game isn't really worth your time, when in fact, someone else could tell you opposite, and not just tell you that, but show you that, show you why you should play it. Whereas I was incapable of doing that because I never enjoyed the game enough to learn the ins and outs that made it as good as it could possibly be. And I think that it really applies to all of us. Nobody is going to like the same game universally.
Mm-hmm.
No one is going to be able to tell you why a game is good or bad universally. Really, and that's a big problem with, I think, that was a big problem on YouTube for a lot of years, because you had people like the nerd, the angry video game nerd, who would make these videos very Nintendo centric. And whenever Sega came up, a lot of times it got shit on. Sega CD would come up. Oh, the Sega CD is shit. This game would come up for the Saturn. Oh, this game is shit. His brand and his character kind of fit the, that doing that. But at the same time, you could really tell that this guy, as popular as he grew up very Nintendo centric and didn't play any of these games until later. So he never really got to put in any serious time as a younger person to learn why these games were good or why this hardware was good. He's just giving you an opinion now that he was able to piece together years later. And I'm not shitting on the guy, man. I'm not saying anything bad about him. I'm just saying that that's the difference in experience. His experience growing up was Nintendo. Our experience growing up was Sega. But even within your fandom, broaden your opinions, broaden the people you listen to. Make sure you spend a little bit of time understanding that one person is never ever going to be right for you all the damn time.
And my experience was very much just everything, like Sega and Nintendo. I was a big Nintendo fanboy, but we had a Genesis first in the household, and I loved it. And then we got the PlayStation, and we ended up getting a 64, but I got the Saturn, and that was just like, that was my identity. That was kind of like the console I chose for, that would be just unique to me, basically. I mean, it wasn't something my dad was interested in. So, I mean, it's like, I can appreciate, I'm not a fanboy. Like, I'm not, even though it's in my name, SaturnDave, it's like, I'm not a Sega fanboy to the point where I'm completely blind to how good, Metal Gear Solid is or whatever, like I do love and appreciate both PlayStation and Nintendo 64 games, but there's something about Sega, and Sega fans know what I'm talking about. It's very hard to put a finger on it. It's a characteristic that is so quintessential to all Sega games. And I can't just say it's the arcade, I can't just say it's bringing the arcade home, because that doesn't represent like the folks who are like super into Knights or whatever, or the folks who are super into like Shining games. But it is just this quality about Sega games that is as unique to Sega as Nintendo games have that quality that's unique to Nintendo. And I think to not allow yourself to experience that, you're really missing something, because I love Nintendo and I appreciate Nintendo. So I feel like I'm blessed to be able to have multiple experiences, and if you just live in this walled garden where all you ever know is Nintendo or all you ever know is PlayStation, you're really missing out on just like a lush and vibrant world of games that just have so much charm and personality to them and so much craftsmanship put into them. So it's like people who aren't into Sega or haven't really stepped in really need to give it a fair shot, because there's just so much good stuff.
Yeah.
Arguably some of the best games ever made.
That's a thing as well, Dave, I find, and you were talking about, broadening your horizons and, being objective enough to say that games on this platform or that are good. I think as well that there's a danger where if they see Sega Lord X, the Sega Holic, the Mega Driver,
Right.
SaturnDave, that they automatically assume that anything good you say about Sega comes from a place of being a fanboy,
Right.
because you've got Sega in your name.
Right.
But we've all owned Nintendo consoles. Like, I've had every piece of PlayStation hardware apart from PS5. So it's like I got a PlayStation in Christmas '97. The 3 games I got were Time Crisis, Tomb Raider 2, and Final Fantasy 7. That was the gift I got for Christmas '97. Like, I pre-ordered Metal Gear Solid and spent a weekend finishing that off. Like, it's one of my favorite games ever. So it's like, just because we have Sega in our name doesn't mean that we're automatically going to hype up everything that's Sega and talk down everything that's not. We've all between us, my God, the wealth of experience that we've got from, myself and Dan starting on like 8-bit computers, like the Spectrum C64, going through to like the Commodore Amiga, Atari ST, the handhelds, Atari Lynx, Game Gear, all the way through. We've seen so much in terms of advancements from generation to generation that there's no way that we're going to be silly enough to sit behind a mic and only chat. If Sega do something bad, we're going to say it. We've seen the good side of Sega. We've seen, sure as hell enough, bad sides of Sega, decisions that were made.
Right.
So yeah, it's just that thing about broadening your horizons, taking views from different content creators within the Sega community is spot on. But just because we have Sega in our names or a system in our names doesn't mean that we're always going to shit on other systems. It's just like to put that out there.
I mean,
we all have between us like insane knowledge.
And I'd be lying if I hadn't considered like just changing my name to like my name, David Lee or whatever, to make things simpler, or to pander to all those people who call me a fanboy or whatever. But then I'm like, you know what? To hell with it. I love the hell out of this console. I want folks to know that. I want folks to know that when they follow me on social, they kind of know what they can expect, that I love the Saturn, and I'm going to try my best to get them to love the Saturn too. But yes, by no means does that mean that I don't have plenty of love for all the other consoles, and that I don't have like a holistic approach to all of them, like I'm not one of those folks who's like, oh, N64 sucks, just because of this, that, or it doesn't have, the Vaseline filter thing that's on the games and stuff. It's like, I can deal with that. I have a lot of nostalgia for the N64, to believe it or not, because I had a friend who had one and he was crazy about it, and he would bring it to like these lock-ins and sleepovers and stuff like that. And we would play it projected up on like a 8-foot screen, GoldenEye 4 split screen, with, screen looking and everything, and the golden gun and everything, and, Star Fox and stuff. So yeah, I have nostalgia for pretty much all the 5th generation consoles and 6th, because then that's when I entered retail and we're selling the consoles, so, but there's really something special about the Saturn that just kind of like, makes it tops for me.
Yeah, it's the same.
And I definitely consider it a success in my book. And like you said, it's my daily driver. Dan driver. It is my daily driver. Like, sure, I'll play the Switch, I'll play PlayStation every now and again, but the Saturn's pretty much my daily driver console. Fire it up, most of the time.
I think we're all quite similar. I mean, it says a lot that we're all on this podcast, we're all talking, we're all connected over this console, which given our, our range of experience, we're all of a similar vintage, shall we say. We've all seen all the generations of games consoles, computer games, back when there wasn't, a standard IBM compatible, we had the Commodores and the Spectrums, like you said, James. And out of all of that, coming through all the advancements in technology, this console, the Sega Saturn, still stands tall. And if that's not a success, I don't know what is.
Well said.
Yeah. Well, that's good words to wrap it up on then, I guess. So yeah, I mean, the Saturn means a lot to all of us. And I know that with each one of our respective outlets, the goal really is to spread that love and get folks to understand why we love it so much, and maybe take part in that, pick up a Saturn, check it out, play the games. You'll see. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us, the Sega Guys, Sega Saturn SHIRO, and Sega Lord X. You guys want to plug your channels, your socials before we go?
Yeah, you can find us just by searching for the Sega Guys on YouTube. You can also find us on Twitter, or X as it's known these days. You find me at Swooper_D. You'll find James at the Segaholic, and you'll find the account at Sega Guys.
I think if you just look up Sega Saturn, you'll find Mel on YouTube.
Yeah, that's the best place to, find anything I do. I'm not really active on social media.
Right.
I consider it devil spawn. It is
You're not wrong.
It is the core of everything that is wrong with the modern world. And I find the least, the less I take part in it, the less it affects my life. So, it's YouTube. I don't really do anything else on social media.
Cool. Awesome. Well, until next time, this has been SaturnDave, Dan the Mega Driver, the Segaholic, and Sega Lord X, reminding you that you must play Sega Saturn.
You must.
And we'll catch you later.
See you on the Sega
Later.
side.
Cheers, guys.
Saturn, しろ